I knew something was off the moment my coffee machine sputtered mid-brew and the lights flickered out. At first, I thought it was a blown fuse. Maybe the toaster and microwave had a secret vendetta. But when I stepped outside and saw the rest of the block lit up like a Christmas parade, I knew it wasn't the grid. It was me. Only me. I was still barefoot, half awake, and ticked off when I saw her. There she was. Dolores Densley, HOA president. 50-something, acrylic nails, platinum bob, and the attitude of a DMV line on a Monday morning. She stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed like she'd just won the lottery. "Good morning, Mr. Fletcher," she sang, drawing out my last name like she was chewing it. "Seems you've neglected to pay your HOA fee this month." I frowned. "Dolores, it was $5. I Venmo'd it yesterday." "We don't accept Venmo," she said with a grin that was all gums and venom. "You were warned. 3 notices. And per Article 6, subsection B of the HOA bylaws, I had full authority to disconnect utility access for non-payment." I stared at her, stunned. "You shut off my power over $5? She tapped her tablet like she was swiping away my dignity. "Rules are rules." I was about to unleash a storm of words I'd regret when she turned and started walking back toward her golf cart, one of those ridiculous custom ones with her name stenciled on the side in gold script, "Madam President." I stood there in my driveway, fists clenched, watching her drive off like a villain in a daytime soap. That's when the ridiculousness of it all truly hit me. She thought she'd won. That's the thing about people like Dolores. They love power. Doesn't matter how small it is, give them a clipboard and a title, and suddenly they think they're a dictator. What she didn't know, what made this whole thing so delicious, was that I wasn't just some guy who forgot to pay a fee. I own the power company. Literally. 3 years ago, I invested in a local startup called GridSure Energy. They'd offered residential solar and backup systems, and eventually expanded into full-scale neighborhood grid management. Long story short, I own a controlling share. In this neighborhood, it was one of our pilot zones. I walked back inside, lit a candle, and laughed for a full minute. She wanted to play power games? She had no idea who she was messing with. I didn't waste time. By the time the sun finished rising behind the elm trees that lined our block, I was already on a conference call with GridSure's regional operations manager, Marco Alvarez. He answered with a yawn and a mug of coffee in hand, his camera angled too high as usual. "Morning, boss. Something wrong on your end?" "Yeah," I said, opening my laptop as I walked into the garage, where my backup server and solar control interface were located. "Someone authorized a manual kill switch on my residential line. I need to know who signed off." Marco blinked. "That's not possible. Our systems are automated unless there's an emergency override, and those require C-suite credentials or municipal coordination. It happened at 6:42 this morning. Look up Ridgepoint Lane, house number 74. He leaned forward, tapping away. "Give me a sec." I pulled up my own feed. The grid log showed a scheduled disconnection entered through a third-party maintenance account. That was already a red flag. Those were supposed to be limited to utility contractors for physical repairs, not HOA board members playing sheriff. Marco let out a low whistle. "Okay, this is weird." The request came from a proxy access code linked to a defunct contractor from 3 years ago, but the override was authenticated by a user tagged as HOA admin Ridgepoint. I stared at the screen. That account shouldn't even exist. "Exactly," Marco said. "We phased out HOA admin level access when we switched to the new security protocol last year. This shouldn't be possible." I tapped my fingers on the desk. "Pull the audit trail. I want IP logs, location data, everything. And lock down any residual HOA access for every pilot neighborhood, effective immediately." "You got it." "Should I notify legal?" "Already on it," I said, clicking open another tab. I pulled up my encrypted messages and typed a quick note to Evelyn Cho, GridSure's corporate counsel. She was a former federal prosecutor who didn't believe in taking prisoners. I paused, then added, "Also loop in compliance. This smells like credential fraud." By 9:30, I had everything I needed. The access code used to shut down my power had been generated from an IP address located at the Ridgepoint HOA clubhouse. The timestamp matched perfectly with the moment Dolores had arrived on my driveway. She hadn't just overstepped her authority, she'd tampered with a secured utility system using credentials that should have been deactivated years ago. That wasn't a policy violation. That was felony-level cyber intrusion. I printed the logs, loaded them into a binder, and got in the truck. The HOA clubhouse sat at the end of the block, next to the tennis court nobody used and the pool that had been closed since spring. I parked out front, walked straight past the residents only beyond this point sign, and pushed open the glass door. Dolores was inside, seated at a round table with two other board members, Robert, who only ever voted the way she did, and Connie, who once tried to find a neighbor for planting sunflowers that clashed with the neighborhood palette. She looked up, clearly not expecting me. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, adjusting her scarf like she was about to host a tea party. "If you're here to discuss your payment delinquency, I must remind you save it," I said, tossing the binder on the table. She blinked at it. "What's this?" "Evidence," I said, folding my arms. "Of unauthorized access, misuse of a restricted contractor credential, and violation of state and federal utility law." Robert leaned back in his chair. "Is this a joke?" "Not even a little," I said. "The access code used to shut off my power was traced to this building's IP. The account used to do it was supposed to be terminated, meaning someone here either hacked into a defunct system or used stolen credentials. That's a crime, Robert." Dolores's face didn't change, but her grip on her pen tightened just enough to notice. "That's a very serious accusation," she said. "It is," I agreed, "which is why I've already reported it to the county sheriff's office. They're sending someone over this afternoon. You'll want to have your calendar clear." She opened the binder with a forced calm, scanning the pages. Her eyes flicked up. "This proves nothing." "It could have been anyone on the Wi-Fi." "Unlikely," I said. "The HOA router uses MAC address filtering. Only registered devices can access it. And guess what? The device that executed the override was a tablet registered to your name." Robert stood up. "Okay, hold on. Maybe there's a misunderstanding here. Dolores was just trying to enforce policy. She committed cyber trespass against a regulated utility system," I cut in. "That goes well beyond policy. And if she accessed that credential without authorization? That's identity fraud." Dolores stood, her chair scraping sharply against the tile. "I will not be threatened in my own office." "You're not being threatened," I said. "You're being investigated. There's a difference." Connie looked like she wanted to disappear into her seat. "I didn't know she still had access," she muttered. Dolores shot her a look. I turned to leave. "You'll be hearing from our legal department. In the meantime, I'd suggest you suspend all board activity until this is resolved. You're exposed, Dolores, and not just legally. If word gets out that the HOA is compromising residents' utilities over petty disputes, the public backlash will make your little power trip look like a parking ticket." I walked out without waiting for a response. By noon, a sheriff's deputy had arrived at the clubhouse. I watched from across the street as he took statements, collected devices, and left with a box of evidence. By 2, Gridsher issued a formal complaint to the State Utilities Commission, citing unauthorized interference by a non-permitted party. But it was what happened that evening that really made things unravel. I was in my backyard, finally enjoying a hot cup of coffee, when my neighbor, Joel, walked over holding his phone. He was a quiet guy, a retired firefighter who mostly kept to himself. "You see this?" he asked, showing me his screen. It was a post from the neighborhood group chat. Someone had leaked photos of the sheriff's visit, along with a detailed summary of the accusations. The thread had exploded. Dozens of comments, most of them furious. "Is it true she cut your power? Was that even legal? She shut off my cousin's water last year over a missing mailbox screw." Then came the kicker. Someone uploaded a screenshot of an old email thread where Dolores bragged about having backdoor access to HOA systems and could override anything if needed. The story spread like wildfire. By the next morning, Channel 7 had a news van parked on the corner. A reporter stood in front of the clubhouse with a mic in hand as residents shouted questions behind her. Dolores didn't show up that day, or the next. By week's end, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting this time, open to all residents. And I was just getting started. The community center was packed. Every folding chair was taken, and the rest of the residents lined the walls, whispering under their breath or glaring at the front of the room where the remaining 2 HOA board members, Connie and Robert, sat quietly behind a plastic table. The third chair, the one Dolores had always used, was conspicuously empty. I stood near the back, arms crossed, saying nothing. I didn't need to. The room was already electric. buzzing with frustration and a sense of long-suppressed resentment. This wasn't just about me anymore. The curtain had been pulled back, and people didn't like what they saw. Connie cleared her throat into the microphone. We appreciate everyone coming on such short notice. Today's meeting is to address the recent developments involving the board and allegations concerning utility interference and administrative overreach. A woman in the third row shot her hand up. You mean Dolores cutting off a person's power over $5 and getting caught breaking into a utility system? Robert leaned forward. We understand emotions are high, but let's keep this civil. A man near the door interrupted. She threatened to fine my daughter for chalk drawings on our driveway. Don't talk to us about civility. Another voice cut in. What about the time she tried to tow my car during a snowstorm because it was parked at an angle while I was shoveling the sidewalk? Connie looked pale, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to regain control. While we cannot speak for Dolores directly, we have initiated an internal review of her actions and are cooperating with the authorities. That was my cue. I walked forward slowly, binder under my arm, and stopped just short of the table. I didn't need a microphone. The room had gone pin-drop silent. I have no doubt you're reviewing, I said. But this goes far beyond HOA policy violations. There's a criminal investigation underway. The sheriff's office has already taken possession of the devices used in the unauthorized override. Their forensic techs confirmed those actions were executed from within this building, using reactivated access credentials that hadn't been valid in over 2 years. Robert's eyes flickered. We weren't aware she still had credentials. You didn't know, I said, voice steady. But she did, and she used them to shut off my home's power illegally. But here's the part you may not know. That override system she accessed is part of a federally regulated infrastructure. Tampering with it isn't just a bad decision, it's a federal offense. Gasps echoed across the room. I opened the binder, flipping to a page and holding it up. This is a copy of a subpoena issued yesterday by the county district attorney's office. It demands all internal communications involving HOA decisions made under Dolores's authority over the past 18 months. That includes emails, meeting minutes, and records of fines, liens, or property violations. If anything was fabricated, or if residents were financially targeted under false pretenses, it will be uncovered. Connie's voice was barely audible. We didn't fabricate anything. Then you have nothing to worry about, I said. But I'll tell you who does. Dolores. The DA's office is pursuing charges of unauthorized access to a protected system, computer fraud, and reckless endangerment. And given that she used her position to target residents, they're also exploring whether this qualifies as abuse of authority under state statute. Murmurs erupted again. This time, it wasn't shock, it was relief. Vindication. A man near the front stood up and turned to address the crowd. We've been putting up with this for too long. The fines, the threats, the random inspections, it all makes sense now. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was running a racket. A woman with a baby balanced on her hip nodded. She tried to charge me for repainting my mailbox twice in 1 year. Said the color faded inconsistently. That's not enforcement, that's extortion. Connie looked ready to cry. Robert just stared at the tabletop like it might open up and swallow him. I closed the binder. I've already submitted a formal petition to the State Homeowners Regulatory Board to place Ridgepoint HOA under temporary receivership. That means an independent party would take over administration until this mess is sorted out. Robert finally spoke again. You can't just dissolve the board. I'm not dissolving it, I said. But let's be clear. If you want to keep your positions, you'll need to be re-elected. By the residents. With full transparency. That includes disclosing every financial decision made under Dolores's tenure. He looked at Connie, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Another voice piped up from the back. Why don't we vote now? The room erupted in applause. It wasn't even planned. It was just decades of frustration boiling to the surface all at once. Someone rolled out a whiteboard. Markers were passed down the rows. Names were written. Nominations made. I didn't run. I didn't need to. But I did nominate someone: Joel, the retired firefighter. A man with no interest in power, but plenty of integrity. He tried to wave it off, but the crowd insisted. He won unanimously. By the end of the night, the board had been turned over. Joel stood at the front, awkwardly holding the mic like it was a foreign object. He thanked everyone and promised transparency and reform. No more secret fines. No more retaliatory policies. and definitely no more unapproved access to residents' homes or utilities. But the fallout wasn't over yet. The next morning, I got a call from Evelyn Cho. Her voice was tight, controlled. "Thought you should know," she said. "Federal investigators just got involved." I sat down. "Homeland Security?" I asked. "Yep. Because the override command Dolores used didn't just affect your house. It pinged a system-wide diagnostic protocol. If she had entered one wrong line of code, she could have triggered a cascading failure in the neighborhood's grid. That's not just illegal, that's a serious infrastructure threat." I let out a low exhale. "So now it's federal." "It's federal," she confirmed. "They're classifying it as critical system interference. And since she used an old contractor credential, there's now a fraud angle. She's facing at least half a dozen charges." "Has she been arrested yet?" "They picked her up an hour ago. She tried to tell the arresting officer it was all a misunderstanding. Claimed she was just doing her job." I chuckled. Classic Dolores. "But here's the kicker," Evelyn added. "They found over $20,000 in HOA funds unaccounted for, most of it funneled through an administrative reimbursement account only she had access to. That investigation's just beginning." I hung up and stepped outside. The sun was bright, the air crisp with the clean scent of a neighborhood finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Neighbors were out walking, smiling, waving. Not in that forced, "I hope she doesn't write me up" kind of way. In the kind of way that said, "We're free now." As I stood on my porch sipping coffee, Joel strolled by, holding a clipboard. "Morning," he said. "We're organizing a community barbecue this weekend. No forms, no permits, just food and neighbors." "I'll bring the power," I said. He gave me a look. "Literally," I added. "Solar-powered grill. You'll love it." The Saturday barbecue was in full swing by the time I got the second call from the county investigator. I was halfway through flipping a tray of skewers on the solar grill when my phone buzzed, and I stepped away toward the fence line. The music was playing low, kids were running circles around the tables, and the mood had shifted into something the neighborhood hadn't felt in years: peace. "Fletcher? It's Donnelly. You got a minute?" "Sure. What's the update?" "We've gone through the preliminary audit of the HOA's financials. I'm going to need you to come down Monday and sign an affidavit. We found patterns that match structured withdrawals small enough to avoid alerts, spaced just far enough apart to look routine. But the paperwork doesn't match the board's approval records." I ran a hand through my hair. "How much?" "Just shy of $28,000. All tagged as miscellaneous operations expenses. Let me guess, Dolores signed off on everyone?" "Right up until 3 months ago. After that, someone else started co-signing. We think she roped in another board member once she figured the heat was coming." I didn't need to ask who. "Robert." "Bingo." I exhaled slowly. "You charging him?" "We're preparing subpoenas. And we're coordinating with the state attorney's office. But here's the thing, this goes beyond embezzlement. A lot of those expenses were billed to a shell maintenance company that doesn't exist. We traced the EIN, guess who registered it? Her son. Her nephew. Address listed to a vacant office suite downtown. We got surveillance footage of him withdrawing cash from the account. It's textbook laundering." I glanced back at the cookout. Joel was laughing with a group of neighbors near the lemonade stand. The atmosphere was still light, but it wouldn't stay that way when everyone knew how deep this ran. "You think there's more?" I asked. "We're bringing in a forensic accountant. If this was going on for over a year, there could be kickbacks from vendor contracts or inflated service bids. We've already flagged a landscaping invoice for $7,000, no record of any work done during that month. No security footage either." "Let me know what you need from me," I said. "I'll have everything ready." Donnelly paused. "There's one more thing. Your name came up indirectly. Apparently, Dolores tried to claim you were threatening her. She filed an incident report the day after the clubhouse meeting." I blinked. "What?" "She said you intimidated her with corporate influence and abused your position to undermine community leadership." I couldn't suppress a dry laugh. "Did she mention the part where she committed wire fraud and accessed a restricted infrastructure system?" "She left that part out." I shook my head. "Let me know if I need to provide a formal counterstatement." "You might. But between the logs you submitted and the federal breach report, her credibility's shot. She's facing multiple felony charges, and the feds are pursuing obstruction since she tried to destroy her tablet before we got to it." "Destroyed it how?" "Dropped it in her koi pond." "Didn't work." "Of course not." He chuckled. "We'll be in touch." I ended the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. As I walked back to the grill, Joel glanced over. Everything okay? For now, I said. But you're going to need a real treasurer. Someone who can read a spreadsheet without skimming for dollar signs. He pointed his tongs at me. You volunteering? Not a chance. But I'll help vet the next one. The rest of the afternoon passed smoothly. No one mentioned Dolores, or the board, or the investigation. For the first time in a long while, Ridgepoint felt like a neighborhood again, not a gated kingdom under siege. But Monday brought new storms. I walked into the county building just before 10, binder in hand. Donnelly met me in the lobby, leading the way into a glass-walled conference room on the second floor. Waiting inside were two people I didn't recognize, a woman in a navy suit with a Department of Justice badge clipped to her lapel, and a man in a gray blazer with a federal ID tucked into his breast pocket. Mr. Fletcher, the woman said, standing. I'm Agent Rivas. This is Agent Marlowe. We're with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Division. I nodded. I figured this was coming. She gestured to a seat. We've reviewed the breach logs from GridSure's system. The override Dolores initiated didn't just affect your home. It activated a dormant node ping that cascaded through 4 linked neighborhoods. If it had run its full course, it could have triggered a false alarm in the regional grid's failsafe system. Marlowe opened a folder and slid it toward me. We've initiated an internal review to determine how a deprecated contractor account was able to access the system. But the trigger command was very specific. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't guessing? No. The command syntax she entered was copied verbatim from a test routine used 3 years ago during pilot diagnostics. That routine isn't public. Someone gave it to her. I leaned forward. You think she had help inside GridSure? It's possible, Rivas said. That's why we're opening a joint task force with your legal department. We'll need access to internal audits, contractor vetting records, and any communications involving credential permissions. I nodded. I'll get you everything. But the real shock came an hour later, when I returned to my truck and found a manila envelope wedged under the windshield wiper. No return address. No handwriting. Inside was a printed memo, dated from nearly 2 years ago. It was on Ridgepoint HOA letterhead, signed by Dolores, and addressed to a local IT firm, requesting a network diagnostic and system integration for HOA infrastructure tools. The wording was vague, but there was a line that made my blood run cold. Ensure administrative access to third-party utilities can be restored in the event of resident noncompliance. She'd planned it. All of it. Not just my power cutoff. Not just the fine system. She had been building a backdoor long before I ever missed that $5 fee, probably before half the residents even moved in. And she'd paid for it with HOA funds. I scanned the footer. The invoice number matched one of the flagged payments Donnelly had mentioned. It wasn't landscaping. It wasn't maintenance. It was the foundation of her private control network. I drove straight back to the county building and handed the memo over. Within the hour, Donnelly had confirmed the payment trail. The IT firm had since closed shop, but the technician who did the work had moved to Oregon and still had backups of the original email chain. By Wednesday, a new charge had been filed: conspiracy to defraud residents through unauthorized technological control. It carried a potential sentence of up to 15 years. The local paper ran the headline the next morning: HOA president indicted in utility fraud, grid tampering scheme. Dolores didn't make bail. Robert resigned from the board that same day, citing personal stress. Connie stepped forward and admitted she'd signed off on 2 of the fake expenses without reading the breakdown. She cooperated fully, and the DA's office opted not to press charges against her. The new board, led by Joel, voted to suspend all enforcement actions until a full policy review could be completed. They opened the books to public scrutiny. Every resident received a printed ledger of the last 2 years' expenses, with annotations and cross-referenced receipts. There were a few more surprises: overpriced mulch, triple-billed pest control, but nothing on the scale of what Dolores had hidden. GridSure rolled out a new security patch. HOA access was terminated permanently, and a public statement was issued clarifying that no external organization, board, or association would ever be granted override permissions again, only licensed technicians operating under municipal authority. It took months for the dust to settle, but it did. The pool reopened. The tennis court was repainted. And that ridiculous resident compliance hotline Dolores had set up disconnected permanently. I kept to myself for the most part. Helped Joel draft the new bylaws. Sat in on a few meetings. But I never joined the board. That wasn't my job. My job was to make sure no one ever forgot how close we came to handing over our lives to a petty tyrant with a tablet and a grudge. And when they asked me, months later, why I never retaliated, why I didn't go after her harder, or sue for damages, I just said the same thing every time. I didn't need to. She flipped the switch. All I did was show everyone who really had the power.